Greetings. My name is Ian Gawler, and I'm speaking to you from Melbourne in Australia. Melbourne's down the southeast, the bottom right-hand corner of Australia. So, for any of you listening from Europe and that sort of part of the world, I'm about as far away on the planet as I possibly could be. So, welcome from down under. And I've been asked to speak a little bit about my story and what I have learnt through that story and the work that flowed out of it. So essentially, I started life in fairly fortunate circumstances, but probably like many of us have had what they euphemistically call a interesting life, which generally means there have been a fair few ups and downs. And after this sort of fairly auspicious start in life at 12, my mother died suddenly and unexpectedly. And then a week later, my beloved dog was run over and killed on the road. And a week after that, I was sent off to a school camp. And one of the evenings, I woke up with one of the masters in the bed with me. So I had these three rather calamitous things happened one after another. And probably curiously, in retrospect, instead of making me angry and disenchanted with life, it actually made me really curious. It actually aroused my curiosity because I thought, well, the fairly simplistic Christian upbringing I'd been enjoying to that point, my family went to church regularly and I enjoyed all of that. The sort of paradigm was, as I took it as a 12-year-old, was basically, be a good boy and things will be okay. And by 12, I certainly was no angel, but I could reason that the things that had happened to me, these three sort of tumultuous events, didn't make sense in the context of my life to that point. So it actually made me keener to actually look into the truth of what it was to be a human being and what my life's meaning was and what its purpose was. So I was at that age dead set keen on becoming a veterinarian. And so I was doing all the science sort of study, but at the same time I was reading quite widely. I probably read about 50 books a year, and I was reading on philosophy, and that grew into sort of existential philosophy and then Eastern philosophy. And I kept coming up against this thing called meditation, which was mentioned in passing in lots of these books. And in those days, there was very little guidance about how to practice meditation, let alone even define what it was. And you were left with this sort of suggestion that it was something really important and at the heart of finding the truth, but really no sort of direction how to pursue it. So it became one of those things I thought, I'll do one day. And I set about getting through secondary school and into university. But as it happened at the end of secondary school, I had quite a profound mystical experience. One evening I was going into Melbourne, the city. It was dark and the lights were on, and there were a lot of people coming out of the city as I was going in, and the light was bouncing off the rain and the wet streets and the walls of the city. And in a sort of unannounced instant, I had this really strong experience of the interconnectedness of all these people that were in front of me and walking towards me. And at the same time, I had a real sense that I was apart from them. So I had this sense of awareness linking humanity, but also the sense that I was experiencing that. So it was sort of like I still had this dualistic sense of me being aware of this sort of non-dual experience. And it occurred to me very clearly that the purpose in life, one of main experiences one could seek in life was to actually have this non-dual experience more completely, to feel like I was actually a part of that oneness. And so that sort of directed my reading even more. But then I graduated as a veterinarian. I was very busy because I was also quite a committed athlete, and I did the decathlon. So that was 10 athletic events, and it was quite a lot to be doing. And so I was both fit and very active. And then at the age of 24, excuse me, what I thought was a training injury, and it was a lump in my right leg, turned out to be a bone cancer, an osteogenic sarcoma. And so this was late 74, early 75. And the treatment in those days was surgical amputation of the leg through the hip. So that happened early in 75. And of course, as you can probably imagine, that changed my life again quite dramatically. And again, I was really fortunate, I think, in retrospect, again, because I realized very early after the amputation that if I was going to focus on what I'd lost, which was a lot, then I was just going to have a miserable life. And it really struck me that disability was a relative thing. And I was really helped in having that understanding through having been a decathlon athlete, actually, because in the decathlon you do these 10 different events. And so you end up being reasonably good at all of them, but not particularly good at any one of them. So if I went and trained with the 100-metre sprinters, I was quite handicapped when it came trying to keep up with them. And if I went and trained with the pole vaulters, I was quite handicapped when it came to comparing myself to the people who did that full time. And if you think of somebody who was really at the top of their game, like somebody like Usain Bolt, who was, remains the greatest 100-metre sprinter we've seen to date. My guess is that while he was the best in the 100 metres, if he tried to do the pole vault, he would have found he was quite disabled. And I'm not sure what his javelin throwing would have been like either. And so I'd had this experience, and I realised that being alive in whatever condition you happen to be, the task is to make the best of what you've got available to you. And so when I had two legs, I was faster than a lot of people and slower than a few. On one leg, I'm faster than a few and slower than a lot. But I still get around. I still manage to do what I need to do. And that sort of disability is very much a relative thing. And if I compare myself to other people, and I get around on crutches because it's more convenient, if I compare myself to other people, I could have a pretty miserable time of it. But because I stay within my own sort of sense of what I can do and what I can't do, it's actually very comfortable, and I've been able to accomplish quite a bit. So actually, after I had my leg amputated, I was told I had a 5% chance of being alive in 5 years, which obviously isn't a great prognosis, but I thought, well, that's pretty good odds. I didn't have any trouble imagining myself being in that 5% 5 years later. But in actual fact, less than a year later, the cancer reoccurred. And I was in big trouble because this is the end of 75, and there was no effective treatment for secondary osteogenic sarcoma in those days. It's still pretty difficult cancer to have to deal with. And I realised that if I wasn't going to die in a pretty short space of time, I was told that my prospect of living more than 3 to 6 months was just about nil. I realised that if I was going to make a difference to that, I was going to have to do something different. Clearly, statistics are made up of what most people do, and unfortunately, most people who had got secondary osteogenic sarcoma in those days died within 3 to 6 months, fairly uniformly, actually. So I was fortunate, actually, because this is end of 75, going into 76. And that was those pioneering days when meditation was starting to be used therapeutically. And Dr. Ainsley Mears, who was an Australian psychiatrist living in Melbourne and who I got to know and got help from, was really the genuine pioneer in the West of therapeutic meditation. And he may not be known so well even in Australia these days, actually, let alone in other parts of the world, but he was very well published in those days, and I learnt a lot from him. And I took what I learnt of meditation through the recovery that went on for 2 or 3 years and became the mainstay of what helped me to endure the difficulties I went through and actually helped with the recovery process. And I also got very intensively involved with the nutritional side of things. Those were the days of positive thinking and, affirmations and guided imagery. I learned a lot about pain management. I had to work a way through my fear of dying and come to terms with that, because if you're full of fear and anxious about the future, it makes it much harder to heal. And I had some medical treatment. I don't think anybody's suggesting that that was the curative element. And from my side of it, I see it as a combined, integrated approach. But I really valued what I would call lifestyle medicine, which is to do with things like meditation, what you eat, exercise, all those things that you can basically do for yourself. So I was really fortunate, and about 2.5 years later, I was found to be cancer-free. And I went back to my veterinary profession for a while. But I got so many inquiries about how come I was still alive and did I think what I'd done might help other people, that after a while I decided to start up groups so that I could gather people together. They could benefit from peer support and sharing their experiences, but also learn about what became to be known as lifestyle medicine. So I ended up in 1981 founding what was probably one of the world's very first lifestyle-based cancer self-help programs. And that became very popular. And it soon became apparent that what we were doing was making a big difference to people who were dealing with cancer themselves. But it was also really helpful for their partners, their families, and other people who took it up. So initially we started to run prevention programs, but as you may know, people don't seem to find prevention particularly attractive. So then we started calling them wellness or well-being programs, and that seemed to be much more enticing to people. And so we started doing programs using the same sort of lifestyle medicine approach to health generally, as well as doing specific meditation programs and retreats. And so that became quite involved, and we had a lot of people come to that. We got very good support from our national press. I wrote a number of books about it, and really that work flourished for quite some time. And so if I'm asked to sort of reflect on what I learned from that, I think there's a couple of things that really stand out. And the first one is the importance of the mind. If we think about our own health, our own well-being, our capacity for healing, the body's important, obviously. Our emotional life's important, obviously. But it's the mind that's really the crucial one, because it's the mind that decides what we do. It's the mind that decides what we eat and how much of it. It's the mind that decides what we drink and how much of it. It's the mind that decides whether we exercise and how much we do of it. It's the mind that decides whether we meditate or not and how much we do of it. So the mind plays this really pivotal role. I think another thing that stands out for me is the role of statistics in medicine. And statistics are really helpful when you're talking about groups of people, but they really fall apart when you talk about individuals. And I'd like to really emphasize that as individual human beings, we're individuals, we're not statistics. And so one of the difficulties I've noticed, and having been a veterinarian, I understand this difficulty, is that if you're a doctor and you see a lot of people with a particular type of cancer, for example, then you start to form a view about what happens to most people. And so if you're dealing with, there's about 100 different forms of cancer. So if there's a cancer that, say, has a 5% death rate over 5 years, then I'd say most doctors statistically say, well, this new patient in front of me's got a 95% chance of survival for 5 years, so I can treat them as if they're going to survive, and we'll deal with the 5% if we have to face it. Whereas if it's the opposite, and with a different type of cancer, perhaps there's a 5-year chance of survival after 5 years, then I think my experience of it is a lot of doctors, quite understandably, form the view that most people that I see with this particular condition are going to die, and so I'll treat them all as if they're going to die. And they miss the point that they're not actually talking to a statistic, they're actually talking to an individual. And at that point of initial contact, and even further down the track, it's very hard to predict which group they're going to fall into, which 5%. Because clearly some people with any condition that's potentially fatal will die quicker than others, and some live longer than others. And so I think as individuals, it's very important that we understand that we are individuals, and statistically, we can get an idea of the degree of difficulty of something that we're dealing with. And, if you're told you've got a 5% chance of being alive in 5 years' time, that indicates you've got a pretty challenging condition that you're dealing with. It's difficult. But you've got every possibility of being in the 5% or the 95%. So then the next thing to say about that is that it's my strong experience that what people do can influence the outcome of anything. I mean, that makes common sense. I mean, we've all sort of aspired to do different things and been half-hearted about it, and, it's left to chance, basically. Whereas, if we really put our mind to it, as human beings, it's extraordinary what we can accomplish. We've got, amazing bodies, we've got amazing emotional states, we've got this incredible mind, and we've got a spiritual capacity that's extraordinary. And you put all that together and learn how it all works and how to mobilize it, how to direct it, and quite clearly extraordinary things become possible. And so, whether you're dealing with a major illness, and I hope you're not, but if you are, then I really wish you best of good fortune with that. But for those of us who consider ourselves to be basically well, if you think about what's come out of this experience for me, then, to my mind, paying conscious attention to our lifestyle just makes really good, common, practical sense. And unfortunately, there are so many commercial interests operating against us at the moment that really have a financial interest in what we do rather than a health interest in what we do. And so I think we need to be quite selective and particular, about what we eat, what we drink, what sort of influences we allow into our mind, how we manage the busyness and pace of our life. And perhaps the thing to emphasise is the meditation side of it again, because at the very least, and it's by no means a small thing, meditation brings stability to people's lives regularly, and it also brings a clarity of mind to people's lives regularly. So, with those two attributes, it puts us in a much better place to deal with the ups and downs of life, because we've got this inner stability, and also because we've got some clarity. We can think clearly and make good decisions. And then there's all the other benefits that meditation has to offer. So if you're interested in more about what I do, you can Google my name, and we've got a website. And I would just like to finish by encouraging you to consider, if you're not already, developing a regular practice of meditation. For those of you that are, I'd encourage you to keep going. In my experience, doing a retreat once a year is really good sense. I mean, things are so busy in our lives these days that to take some time out as an annual event, to step out of your life, to go into a supportive environment, a supportive atmosphere like most retreats will provide, perhaps to get some teaching on meditation and sort of the philosophical construct that goes with that in life. But really to take some time for yourself where you can stand back from your life a little, reflect, contemplate on what's been going on in recent times and where you're aiming to go, then a retreat really makes a lot of sense as an annual event. So I hope there's been something of interest in what I've had to say. It's a pleasure to be able to share my story. I actually had my leg amputated 50 years ago, and next year it'll be 50 years since I was told I had 2 weeks to live. So it's been a pretty remarkable 2 weeks, and it's a pleasure to be able to share something of all this with you. So happy meditating, and be well.